Okay, so we've talked about router bits and cleaning router bits, different options for router bits and what to choose. Now I just want to talk about trimming the overhang before you commit your workpiece to the router. And that's very important. That's actually, if you're new to woodworking and you're struggling with this kind of work, that's probably where you need to start. That's probably what you're doing wrong right now. What I have to do here is I'm making a second copy of this bending template, and I'm actually going to design a Florentine cutaway into the second copy so I can flip this over and have one side and then the cutaway side. So that'll be cool. But before I do the cutaway, I have to replicate this template. So that's a good opportunity to show you guys how I do that. So I've traced my existing template onto some MDF here, and really what we're going to do after I cut this out is we're going to trim this down so only about a 1/16 to a 32nd of an inch is left, and often I'll go even lower than that. It really depends on how comfortable you are with getting this as close to the template line as possible without going over it. It's important to get good at that though, because the less that bit has to work, the better results you're going to have, the less dangerous your work is going to be, because if you're basically burying the bit in the wood, then it's that much more likely to throw the piece. And also, you're putting less wear on an expensive bit. So it's really a win-win-win. So once I've cut around the edges, I then jump over to the spindle sander. And actually, if there's one tool that I wish I'd gotten sooner, it's the spindle sander. I absolutely love this thing, and not just for what I'm about to do with it here, but for just so many applications. It has become this workhorse in my shop. And so for what we're about to do here, I'm going to use this size sanding sleeve right here, but any spindle sander that you would buy comes with a variety of sizes. So for example, when I'm doing something with tight inside corners like this, I can switch to this sanding sleeve right here. So now, using 80 grit paper, I'm going to make really short work of reducing this down to about the 32nd of an inch to the line. Okay, so I've brought that down to about a 1/16 of an inch or a 32nd of an inch in some areas, and I'm going to stick the template down with double stick tape. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the remaining material on the router table, and the bit doesn't have to work very hard because there's very little wood left for it to remove. Okay, now it's perfectly flush. You'll notice that when I was routing, I ran the workpiece against the direction of the rotating bit. So the bit's rotating this way, right? Cutting in that direction, which means I feed this against that rotating bit, rather than going with it in this direction, which makes it's called climb cutting, and it's very easy for the bit to, because there's no opposing force against the direction that the bit is pushing, there's nothing to stop the bit from grabbing a hold of this and just running with it and pushing it out that way, which is very dangerous. So that's why we go against the direction of the bit, so that we always have that oppositional force. This segues very nicely into what I want to talk about next, which is grain direction, because what we've been doing up until now hasn't factored in grain direction at all. So let me explain how grain direction is going to change what we would have done with this bit. If this were a piece of solid wood, it would have grain lines running in this direction, right? Just like a guitar body or a guitar top. Again, the bit is rotating in this direction, right? So that means as it comes down here, it's not entering any of these grain lines. It's actually shearing off the wood just ahead of where the grain line starts. But as we get to this point, this is where we would stop, because as you start coming up here, the bit, still spinning in this direction, is now going to catch on the entry points for these grain lines. And what it'll do almost every time is tear out a big old chunk of wood, which is just going to destroy your piece. That's where you want to stop before you start going uphill.